Hi folks, welcome back to Farm Tech Talk, the market show. This week I'm delighted to be joined by Justin McCarthy, the editor of the Farmers Journal, Amy Forde, deputy news editor with the Farmers Journal, and Andy Doyle, our tillage specialist and tillage editor with the Farmers Journal. Folks, thanks for taking the time out. If I was to start off with you, Amy, looking at your front page story there, I see this week in the Farmers Journal, I see the Green Deal is all over it, and the fact that EU is suggesting that farmers should get paid for carbon, a good positive story in terms of setting the template. Tell us a little bit about the kind of, I suppose, the farm to fork strategy and what it aims to do kind of in terms of the developments that you had in the paper this week.
Yeah, Jack. So this week, the European Commission launched its Farm to Fork and Biodiversity Strategies, two things that are going to work in tandem over the next couple of years. And look, it's basically the EU's ambitious targets going forward for what they want to achieve with farming and with biodiversity. In terms of Farm to Fork, look, the big thing is from it that the EU is going to look to potentially pay farmers for carbon sequestration, which is something that's definitely needed, and it's a big step forward. I suppose a lot of farmers would have felt that farming maybe is kind of left behind, or assume that cutting the national herd is the answer to everything, which obviously it isn't. So look, they're going to look at paying farmers to sequester carbon, and that can be funded through the CAP or funded through private companies as well. So that's a positive. It'll be interesting to see how it pans out. The other kind of big hidden headlines from it were that pesticide use is in the firing line, along with fertilizer use. So the EU by 2030 wants to cut fertilizer use by 20% and pesticide use by 50%. So they're two big targets, and it'll be interesting to see again how that pans out. Like, will the Commission support funding towards better alternatives so that tillage farmers at the minute can continue on and that yields may not be affected? I suppose there's a lot of questions around that. The other side of it is that the Commission wants to increase the amount of organic farmland in the EU by 2030, and it wants to increase that to 25%. Again, whether, like, Ireland has the lowest, I think, organic farming area in the EU as a member state, and it'll be interesting to see whether we have to come up to 25% or whether we're going to be kind of weighted against other countries in terms of our land mass, and see how that pans out. So they're the big ones. In terms of the biodiversity strategy, if anyone that's been reading the paper for the last 2 weeks, we've had 2 weeks of farmers on designated land, and the Commission wants to designate more land and to put certain land under strict protection. Again, a lot of farmers would have said that needing to sort out what's going on with the current designations before we go designating more land potentially. So where that land is and what has to be done with it, all has to be discussed. The Commission has said that there'll need to be management measures, and basically how farmers can manage this land going forward. That'll need to be put into place. There's also a bit on rivers. Earlier this year, with serious flooding across the country, we saw, calls for the Shannon to be dredged, rivers to be cleaned, and it appears that the Commission wants to have at least 25,000 kilometres of free-flowing rivers across the EU by 2030, and it says that this can be done by removing certain barriers that are in rivers at the minute. So again, that will be welcome news, but as with everything in these ambitious strategies, how it pans out and how it will affect farmers will be a big thing.
Okay, thanks, Amy. I mean, you've given us a good feel for it's wide and it's broad in terms of its implications, and it has implications for the whole ag sector, not just one. Andy, if I was to come to you, I mean, you've had a couple of days to digest, I suppose, the farm to fork strategy and what it might mean. And again, you have a good feel for agriculture, not just tillage, but I mean, right across the spectrums, from the grasslands in the east to the tillage farmers to the the forestry side of things. Like, I mean, are some of the things that are talked about in this farm to fork strategy, are they kind of inevitable? Like, I mean, we've been talking about some of these issues for a long time in terms of biodiversity and reducing pesticide usage and reducing nitrogen, but artificial nitrogen or bag nitrogen. Like, I mean, So is that inevitable? Is that restrictions that are being talked about, are they inevitable? Or should Ireland Inc., that has the capacity to produce more food, should it be allowed to produce more food and not be restricted in some of these technologies, or in some of the the pesticide usage that will allow more feed to be produced here in Ireland? What's your thoughts on that and the kind of implications for the wider agricultural sector here in Ireland?
Well, I think, Jack, there's no constraint on producing more food. I think that's the important thing to start with. You ask, is it inevitable that constraints would be placed on agriculture and across society as a whole? I think the answer to that is yes. It's inevitable because we keep moving. We by nature, we move too far in one direction and realize that one step back might leave us all better off. And that's kind of been the driver of a lot of what I would be saying and thinking for a long time. We can't just drive on and produce, but we can produce more. The challenge that all of these new regulations are giving us is, can we produce more using less? Decrease the risk of pollution. That's the challenge that we all have. And I think the big difference is more and more things are being classed as pollutant. 30 years ago, nitrogen was a stimulant, it wasn't a pollutant. The same would be true of phosphorus, potash. The same is true of pesticides. But the more you come to depend on them, the less efficient they become. We all reach and pass the law of diminishing returns. And beyond that, you have an efficiency in the system, which for the producer is generally resulting in higher cost, and for the consumer in general is resulting in a greater risk to the environment. If you take the different constraints that are being suggested in these new roadmaps, be it biodiversity or farm to fork, the biggest one, or the most challenging one probably for the industry overall, will be the pesticides one. It shouldn't be a challenge maybe in the long term, but we need to have had the alternatives put in place and proven before the regulations were going to be imposed on us. Probably you could say the same for the fertilizers, but I think when you read the fertilizer usage element of farm to fork, it's really talking more about decreasing the risk of pollution, particularly of nitrogen and phosphorus. And I think overall we haven't been good at doing that. We should be better. We could have done better, and arguably we should have done better. If we had done better, it probably wouldn't change the targets that are in the roadmap going forwards. But we will have to do more. We will have to see a more equitable correction of those issues across agriculture as a whole. We can't have constraints in one place and people kind of maybe even ignoring some of the regulations that are there in other places. We have to get around to improving the efficiency of use. When I stand back and look at the efficiency of use of nutrients in some sectors versus another, the gap is too big. I don't understand or know why, but if we improve the efficiency of use, we can get away with using less. I know from some of the things that I do, I'm using less nitrogen where I'm using different farm practices, and the farm practices are not costing me nearly as much as the nitrogen did. And that is, in a sense, the driver for where this roadmap is going. But we can't just bomb on without respect for the environment and all aspects of the environment. But there is nothing in there anywhere that says we can't produce more food, but we would have to do it more efficiently along the road.
Okay, Andy, I hear you in terms of, as you say, no real cap on production, but I suppose the timelines in terms of how this kind of farm to fork strategy should be imposed on Irish farmers is going to be critical in terms of that evolution piece. Justin, if I was to come to you, I mean, we've heard from Amy now on some of the big issues, the big ticket items that were revealed this week on the front page. We've heard from Andy in terms of, I suppose, what it's going to mean for Irish agriculture and some of the challenges that are there. I mean, from a kind of a broader perspective, in terms of Irish farmers or kind of Ireland Inc., how should we handle this? How should we handle this EU farm to fork strategy? Or what's your thoughts on that piece?
Look, Jack, it's not, given the economic pressures that are on farmers at the minute, with milk prices under pressure, beef prices under pressure, to have a report coming out and talking about pushes towards organic production, food affordability, reduction in pesticide use, reduction in fertilizer use. The timing is terrible, and it's only natural that we would see farm organisations react negatively to this report, given what the headline grabbing figures are. But I think one thing we have to always remember at European level, all policy starts off as a vision, and this is a vision. And ultimately, all visions in Europe get to their end destination. And I think what we have to do here is, rather than try and splash about in front of this super tanker and slow it down, I suppose we have to develop policy, agricultural policy, economic policy at national level. And that means farm organisations coming together with government, with key stakeholders, and forming a policy which effectively acts, Jack, as a tugboat that allows us to nudge this supertanker in the direction that we need it to go, to make sure that we do achieve the objectives, because I don't think any farmer out there wants to be held accountable for environmental degradation or loss of biodiversity, but to make sure we can maintain that, but at the same time as making sure we protect farmers' incomes. And I think that's one of the key positives in this report for me, in that it states very clearly at the outset that a sustainable food production model will only be sustainable if it delivers a sustainable livelihood and income back to farmers. And I think we've got a great opportunity as farmers, farm organisations, policymakers and whatnot, to make sure that we use that as a platform, and that any future policies that are built around this farm to fork or biodiversity strategy are all measured against the impact on a sustainable income for farmers. Because by their own admission, the European Commission accepts that a sustainable food production model is not sustainable if it doesn't protect farm incomes. I think that is a very solid place to start from.
Okay, Justin, I hear you on the farm incomes, but I mean, is there still a piece at play in terms of, I suppose, biodiversity and how to kind of use new technology to make farmers, use that technology so that we can produce product more efficiently and more environmentally friendly? Is there any kind of, I suppose, light or any kind of signs that you see in the farm to fork strategy that might kind of help that whole piece around, I suppose, biodiversity and using new technologies?
Yeah, I think Andy in earlier stated that there's no restriction on production in this. What has often frustrated farmers in Europe is that they're putting more and more regulations on and competing more and more at a global level, but not given the tools that are available to their global competitors. And I think one very important line in the farm to fork strategy for me was a recognition by the European Commission that biotechnology, Jack, which has been ruled out in Europe for so many years, that access to biotechnology could actually help improve the biodiversity and environmental sustainability of food production. And I think it's imperative now that we start to build on that in relation to exploring those new technologies and seeing how those new technologies could allow us to hit the targets that are set down in the farm to fork strategy. And I think that's to be welcomed, and I think a lot of farmers would welcome that, as they would, Jack, in recognising, in the European Commission recognising that soils, agricultural land, actually takes carbon out of the atmosphere. And I've never seen it spelled out as clear in black and white in any significant policy document that farmers do sequester carbon. I think we talked about on Tech Talks a few weeks ago, highlighting the AFBI research that indicated that Irish agriculture could be drawing 11, 12 megatons of carbon out of the atmosphere every year. And to put that in context, that's about 50% of the total emissions from agriculture. So that certainly lends weight in terms of that agriculture should be treated different than other sectors, in that we should be looking at net emissions rather than gross emissions. But again, it's going to be key that farmers don't only get rewarded for what atmosphere or for what carbon they continue to take out of the atmosphere, but also are recognised for what carbon that agriculture actually locks up in soils, and that's going to be important. So there are two other very big issues, as well as the commitment on incomes, the commitment to look at new technologies, and indeed the commitment or the recognition that Irish soils, that agricultural land actually sequesters carbon. And a final one, Jack, and I'll leave it at this. There's also a commitment to implement strong sustainability chapters, environmental sustainability chapters into current and existing trade deals. And there is a specific mention in that to deforestation. and carbon leakage. And I think that's a positive as well, because it's going to be very difficult for the European Commission to continue to allow beef product to flow in from South America whenever they're deforesting huge tracts of the Amazon rainforest to actually sustain that production. And I think that is going to bring a lot more accountability and transparency to trade deals in terms of equalisation of standards.
Okay, good. Right, folks, we've had a good chat on, I suppose, on the farm to fork strategy and kind of where it is. And I'll say to myself, it's a little bit in front of us. It's a little bit into the future in the next, 2, 3, 4, 5 years in terms of how this piece is going to evolve. And I'm sure we'll have lots more on it. I mean, what's more pressing, of course, on Irish farmers at the moment is the pandemic that still grips the country, the COVID-19, and the restrictions that are in place, and I suppose dominating a lot of news stories in the journal. China is seen as a sort of crystal ball in terms of, COVID-19 was there first, and it kind of went through the phases that we're going through now. So, I mean, with that in mind, we said we'd put a call into Conor O'Sullivan. He's Bord Bia's China manager. And just to get a feel for what's happening out there in terms of the return to normal. Are the restaurants opening up again? Are the logistics issues that we had in February and March, are they continuing, or where they are now? So, look, Conor gave us a good feel for what's happening. So I think you should, at this stage, listen to what he has to say. And then I'll come back to Amy and we'll have a chat about kind of some of the issues here in Ireland. Let's listen to what Conor had to say.
I've found, certainly over the last 6 weeks since that last time, it's become more obvious week on week. More people in restaurants, more people out shopping, less masks visible. Social distancing seems to be becoming less and less of a concern. In fact, in most restaurants now, it wouldn't be in place. There are still things like disinfectant of hands, going into offices, temperature checks, and so on. But all in all, China is certainly relaxing quite a lot over the last 6 weeks. In terms of numbers of people back to restaurants, it has improved as well. I've got the latest figures from National Bureau of Statistics. So in April, food service was 70% of what it was last year. So there's still a reduction, but it's not as extreme as it was in February and March. And that's the whole of April, and certainly I've noticed in the last 4 weeks a significant jump up again. And now it's starting to get to a point where people are queuing to get into restaurants at lunchtime or at peak times in the evening. Or there's been quite a few new schemes involved to try and encourage people to come back. So there's just in the month of May alone, I've noticed 4. So the 1st of May is Labour Day, so that's a big encouraging people to eat out. Then they just put one on the 5th of May. I'm not sure why, but that was another day to encourage consumption. Then the 17th of May sounds a bit like I want to eat in Chinese. So that was another big day. And then 2 days ago is kind of like a day when you say it in Chinese, it sounds a bit like I love you. So that was a kind of a mini Valentine's Day. And again, they were encouraging people to come out to restaurants. And on those days, lots of people back, queues and things. And restaurant prices are either where they were or they've gone up. So that's good from that side. In terms of retail, numbers they were less impacted. We all know the story. People stopped eating out, so they started eating at home. Overall, China's retail figure last month was down 7.5%, but actually for food retail, it was up 18.2%. So that's really good news for the food sector. Yeah.
When you mentioned retail, has there been any change, I suppose, in the shopping habits, Conor? Because I suppose we've always known that China is big in e-commerce and that there was a big play there. But I mean, I'm presuming the online shopping piece has got even bigger over the kind of the last 3 months. I mean, we had one of our own Irish companies, ABP, had a kind of a partnership with Alibaba. I mean, is that still going, and is it developing, I suppose, that whole e-commerce piece?
Well, okay. First of all, the partnership is, so last September, Bord Bia signed a partnership with JD.com, which would be the number 2 retail platform in China. Since it was good timing actually, because since then JD really has boomed, Alibaba's boomed, and a number of other platforms have as well. I was reading news from JD last week saying that their JD Fresh, which is their grocery side of the business, that's up 168% year on year. Last week, they sold 27,000 tons of fresh food, and beef was among the top items, one of the top 3. So the other 2 were shrimp and ice cream. So if you rephrase that, that's kind of meat, seafood, and dairy. So that's good. It fits our sectors quite well. In terms of how those promotions are going with Bord Bia and JD, they have been improving every time. So we did one in December, we did one in March, we're hoping to do one next month. What we found is that we're getting more SKUs on, and we're getting new shops involved. So we've gone from just having beef and dairy, we now have pork, and we have a number of beef suppliers, no longer just the one, on a number of beef shops as well. So it's good growth for us, and we're benefiting from that growth overall in e-commerce. But beyond that, in terms of consumption trends, like it'd be the same in China as it was everywhere else. More people eating, so everything that serves that home consumption has gone up. So that's food delivery, from restaurants to home cooked meals. Then there's grocery delivery, so again, straight from the retailer to home. There's been an increase in ready to cook meals. So a lot of restaurants, big chains, who would normally produce in centralized kitchens and kind of ship half-made products out to their various restaurants. They've now kind of pivoted a little bit, and they're now putting those things in packages for people to have at home. So that's a new kind of consumption model that will stay, because it's a new diversified way of doing business. It's a new revenue stream for them. So COVID has helped spur that change, but they'll all be long-term changes. And again, that's where we'd be paying attention to, how this evolves and what opportunities there will be for Ireland. In terms of what consumers then are paying attention to, obviously we would say a lot more attention on the nutrition and health, and the safety of food, again, which all benefits Irish exporters.
Yeah, I mean, one of the challenges during, I suppose it was probably back in February and March, was the logistical challenge of getting containers in and out of China and the ports piece. So I mean, sourcing containers for for imports into Ireland, and that was a challenge. Are the ports getting back to normal, I suppose, at this stage, or what's the kind of whole play around the logistics side?
Yep. So from the Chinese side, they are, and there's kind of two reasons. First, they've managed to clear through the backlog that had built up over March and February, and on the other side, their exports, their own production is recovering. Their exports have started to increase again, so that means that ships are leaving again and have a reason to leave. So that brings them back to Europe for us. We've seen the container situation improve, but it's not back to where it was. I think it's still maybe 15-20% off. The prices are still higher than they would have been normally, but we have found that it's become a less of an issue for our exporters in terms of getting their products out to China. It impacts more the reefers, the refrigerated containers that required for meat exports, more so than ambient exports, like dairy powders and so on. The other one is airlines. So for the seafood industry, the lack of airlines flying from Europe to China, that remains a big issue. But there have been a number of routes that have come available, which are helping to reduce some of the pressures, without being back to where we'd want them to be.
Okay, Amy, to bring this back to home, I mean, we've heard from Conor, and in terms of what's happening in China, that the restaurants are back up to maybe 70% of where they were this time last year, that, life is returning to normal, etc. But I mean, here at home, we still see the disease, the COVID-19 is still impacting on rural Ireland. The big one this week, of course, again, was the meat factories, and the more incidences of COVID-19 in meat factories. Can you just bring us up to speed in terms of where we are in terms of COVID-19 and the impact on meat factories?
Yeah, I suppose, and it's important to point out that while farming itself has gone on, farmers have been able to go move stock to I'm not saying not abide by the rules, but they've been a class as an essential service, and they've been largely unaffected by it. But the opposite is kind of true in meat plants. There were 16 clusters of the COVID-19 in meat plants around the country, and over 800 cases. And I suppose Meat Industry Ireland has pointed out that at least 60% of those have recovered, and they're back at work at the minute. But this week it was revealed that the HSA hadn't done any inspections in meat plants. Of over 240 inspections, there wasn't there wasn't any inspections in meat plants, but it has since come to light that Minister for Business Heather Humphreys told the Dáil last night that 240 inspections have taken place between Monday and Wednesday of this week, and that meat plants were included. So that is kind of moving it on a bit. I suppose Meat Industry Ireland have said that they're working within the guidelines. The HSE has issued them guidelines, and they're doing what they can, I suppose. But that it's an issue that's still rumbling on.
Okay, so that's a kind of a perspective, as you say, from the kind of the beef farmers and indeed the dairy farmers' perspective, because they all feed into that chain. But Andy, from a tillage perspective, I mean, again, I was just reading in the tram lines this week, and I see some of the farmers commenting that they've been busy in the fields, they've been getting planting done, I suppose, early on, and now they're into crop management, etc. In terms of the perspective of the tillage farmer and the tillage industry, and I suppose looking at markets, grain markets, where they are, can you kind of just give us a feel for the impact of COVID-19 on some of those aspects?
Well, I guess putting it very simply, Jack, in terms of doing the work of farming, particularly in tillage, people have been isolated, and people who live in one tractor every day and people who workmen had them assigned to one tractor, you have to think that everything is fairly safe. And it's the norm. It didn't feel like isolation for a lot of people. The bit that felt like or feels like isolation is where you're obliged to not be with, not go to a merchant, not be able to have your discussion groups, not be able to kind of go face to face with advisor. That's all different, but it's not really affecting the work that's going on in most instances and for most people. So it has been largely business as usual. There's probably room for a little bit more socializing in the calendar now, in terms of going and seeing and learning and picking up the new skills and examining what people have done. That's kind of stopped for the time being. But of course, in the farming business, people could still do that as long as they don't get into crowds, or they can sneak into the neighbour's field and see what he's doing, which always happens, or somebody like me would even be doing. With regard to markets have kind of gone both ways during this whole COVID thing. In the early days, there was a significant pickup in markets, generally speaking, driven by wheat, where we were hearing about the demand for flour, because more people were at home and they were doing more of their own cooking, etc., and the scarcity of flour on shelves. But it was a scarcity of flour, it wasn't a scarcity of wheat, but there were issues at times just with logistics early on. Most of those have been ironed out, and now we have the news of the meat factories, particularly on the pig side, more so maybe than even on the beef side, and people are wondering, what's going to happen? Are we going to see an inability to slaughter, etc.? And people are not committing to buying stocks forward, so markets have been very slow, and they've gone into recession again for a while. Behind all that, again, from an Irish market point of view, we have the big issues on malting barley, where all the pubs are shut, restaurants are shut, and a lot of the traditional ways, particularly for Europeans, of socialising have been closed down, and overall consumption is down. So the suggestion is that there will be a decreased demand for malting barley. Some of the purchasers have said that they will not be able to honour the full commitment of their contracts. Others, particularly the co-ops, have said they will honour the full commitment of their contracts, and that certainly is good news for farmers. But there's a lot of things happening around the world, which happen all the time, that are also impacting negatively on markets, and particularly for barley. We had difficulty planting wheats in Europe, and there's much less wheat in Europe. That's a technical plus on one side, but the wheat acreage was replaced by barley, and barley is significantly discounted against wheat. Wheat is also driven by a milling price, and we don't have a milling market. We might argue that we should be looking there again, but that's not a real market for us. So all our wheat is destined for the feed market. So at the moment, we're in quite a depressed state based on the balance of what's happening, because we have a big harvest expected as well at the end of all of this. Just because the virus is there doesn't mean that acres didn't get sown or the yields will be lower. So we're in a fairly depressed state at the moment in markets, but look, at every day is a different day in the world, because weather dictates everything in the game of grain. We can sow the crop, but we might not get as much yield as we're expecting, and that's the uncertainty of grain production.
Okay, I hear you, Andy. And I mean, as you say, much is dependent, I suppose, on what happens in other countries and around the world, whether it's a demand from China, like we heard of from Conor O'Sullivan, or whether it's Germany, one again, a huge agricultural country, we'll say, within Europe. And I suppose because Germany is so important and because it's one of the countries that's returning to, I suppose, normal life, I'll call it, maybe sooner than some other European countries, we said we'd put a call into the managing director of Ornua over there, Danica, Siemer. So I enlisted the help of Larkin Allen, our agribusiness editor, and I got him to put a call into to Danica in terms of, how is Germany, I suppose, coping with it? How is it impacting in terms of the Ornua business and, what the story is there? So the first question he asked her is what is the Ornua business in Germany? Let's hear what you had to say.
So Ornua Germany is involved in packing and distribution of butter spreads, and cheese products. And we are the number one in butter and the number one in cheddar brands in Germany. More than 60% of German households buy at least one Kerrygold pack per year. So we have a very, very high consumer penetration. Our factory produces more than 1 million packs per day. So on every working day, 1 million packs leave our factory and finds its way to retailers and to shoppers. And we have the most heavily sold, the fastest selling single product unit in the German market of all food and beverage brands. So that's quite a strong picture of success. And that's how widely Germany, Ornua is distributed in Germany, and how widely our brand Kerrygold is known to the consumers and loved by our consumers.
Yeah, it's I think that gives a really good sort of feel for how important the German market is. By far our number one market in Ireland for butter exports, and German consumers have a real love of Irish butter, and it's a lot a relationship that goes back many decades, I suppose. At this point, why do German consumers like the Irish the Kerrygold butter brand? What is it that's different about German butter or other butters in Europe that Germans enjoy it so much?
Well, for us, it's first we have a world-class product and we have a well-invested brand. So, but what really is most important is actually the grass-fed advantage that we're having. That means cows grazing on grass almost all year long, whereas in Germany, the German farmers can only guarantee 120 days per year, and the grass season in Ireland is simply a lot longer. And that the element of grass-fed is really bringing the product advantage, the point of differentiation for us in terms of better quality, better taste, and also more softness. And that actually really makes the whole difference for us being so successful in Germany. It's all behind grass-fed.
Yeah, so great to hear from Danica, obviously, that the Ornua, the Kerrygold brand, is still going well in Germany and the number one. I mean, it's frightening to think 1 million packs of butter or cheese going through a plant and going onto German shelves every day. Justin, to come to you and to pick up on that, I suppose, in terms of, like we heard from Danica, that that the grass-fed is the key to success of the Kerrygold brand in Germany. I mean, that's what, yes, she talked about its well-invested brand, and they put a lot of promotion and work into it, obviously, but I suppose if I was to ask the question, in terms of what is the equivalent premium product at scale from a beef farmer's perspective. I'll come to Andy on the tillage perspective, but at a beef farmer's perspective, what is the equivalent premium product that delivers, I suppose, premium to the farmer and, to the industries that are involved in it? Like, I mean, is the beef sector, we've seen McDonald's come back on stream this week, but is the beef sector going to be continuing to be dependent on, the fast food service outlet to get more meat, that high quality meat protein to consumers? Or where do you see a vision for that piece in terms of the premium markets for beef?
You've touched on a real nerve there, Jack, in relation to beef farmers. That's a huge frustration. Beef farmers, like dairy farmers, believe, and rightly so, that they produce a premium product, but unfortunately there's very little premium comes back in the marketplace. we produce a premium, and it is argued that we sell it as a commodity, and that is a very unsustainable position to be in, because you have the cost of premiumization at production level and you don't extract it back out of the market. And look, I've often argued, Jack, when we compare Irish beef prices to across continental Europe and whatnot, it's a false economy, because we're comparing what is a predominantly steer-based product to a young bull beef product, and so that's not even a good benchmark. And look, we pat ourselves in the back and think it's a great success when we're getting close to 98, 100% of the European average, and we should recognise that sometimes we get higher than that. But there is no doubt the structure of the Irish beef market does create a challenge in that regard, Jack, in that we have, through Ornua, and I often think that we don't take the value that Ornua creates for Irish dairy farmers seriously enough, in that it's a common marketing strategy within some of our key export countries. Whereas if we had one clear marketing strategy for our product in these new emerging countries, well, then maybe we could start to get see value coming back from the marketplace in relation to our green credentials, in relation to our grass-based systems, and in relation to our suckling systems. And perhaps that's where the biggest value loss is actually being created, Jack, that we're not able to premiumize the suckler beef production systems in this country. And that is a huge concern, a huge issue. We've argued before that we should look to a Kerrygold brand for beef, but it's going to take time, it's going to take investment, and it's going to take a change in the structures that would be required to allow, for example, a Bord Bia or someone create the equivalent of a harmonized marketing strategy for beef like an Ornua. But that's going to take a lot of vision. And look, when you look at the fragmentation in the beef industry at the minute, it's very difficult to see where that is actually going to come from. But I think that we have to start and create a vision as to how we can premiumize suckler bred beef in this country and make sure that that premium is passed back to farmers.
Okay. So I hear you. So you think it's grass-fed meat really, and the whole story and the whole production cycle that makes that a kind of an Irish ink product very different from what you can get anywhere, whether it's Africa or China or anywhere else. Andy, I mean, I read your article with interest again this week in terms of the flour issues that Ireland has, and the fact that we import all our flours, etc., into Ireland, despite the fact we grow wheat. If I was just to stick with the same question that I asked Justin on the beef side, from the tillage side, from a tillage perspective, where is the premium product that delivers a premium on the shop shelf that can be delivered back to deliver a kind of a better price for Irish grain farmers?
Jack, I think I'll start the answer by following up on the comments that Justin made as well. Because all products in Ireland are grown to the standard that makes them premium products, but very few of them pick up any premium for doing that in the marketplace. The major ex-farm product, excluding the horticultural side, the major ex-farm products that will pick up a premium at farm level would be malting barley into the drinks industry, be that at the brewing end or at the distilling end. That's where the major premiums come from. The biggest single premium probably is coming in for oats, on the gluten-free oats. That's a real option that is putting money in farmers' pockets. But the biggest single crops that we're growing, and the biggest areas of crops are going into the feed market, and like they're not only not being regarded as premium by virtue of what they're doing to meet all the standards and more of European farming, but they're being devalued by the cheapest import sources that are available from anywhere in the world. And that's not something that's kind of easy to live with, and it can make one's blood boil, because realistically, if we were serious about enhancing the image of Irish agriculture, we would be insisting that all our other premium brands, premium products going out through the livestock side would be supplemented by the little bit of compound feed that might be needed, with Irish being the base for that. And I'm not saying that it necessarily is worth more, but it shouldn't be worth less because something else is available for less. And that's a real challenge that the tillage industry has in this country.
Okay, I hear you, Andy. Malting barley, gluten-free oats, they're two real options at the moment, I suppose, for farmers. But as you say, you're hinting at a kind of a slight disjointness between the sectors, that we're not linking up the different sectors, and the importing piece, as you say, coming back to kind of haunt farmers that are producing these high quality products. Okay, some good stuff, lads, and good thoughts in terms of where we are and where the news stories of this week, how they play out in terms of current issues on farms, and I suppose future issues that farmers should be aware of. Listen, I've held you for long enough. I just want to finish maybe a question each. Amy, if I was to come to you on farm safety, I mean, I see you've quotes there from Pat Griffin, the Health and Safety Authority, guru, in terms of that farmers are simply not doing enough on farms, in terms of they're just not listening to the warnings on farm safety, etc. So I mean, there is obviously an issue there in terms of that the farmers could do more, but they're not. What do you think on that?
Yeah, I suppose the last 2 weeks, Jack, we've seen a number of fatalities across the island of Ireland, and a number of incidents that we've reported on farmersjournal.ie, of close calls, basically. And look, this is a very busy time of year. It's silage season. Field work is going on. There's a lot going on. And look, Pat Griffin, as you say there, from the HSA's senior inspector, he's basically told farmers to cop on and to plan their farm work more professionally. He said this thing of bringing children with them doing any type of farm work, like, it can't go on. He says if we stop bringing children out when we're doing farm work, that the accidents will stop. He said, like, they shouldn't mix farm work, and children shouldn't mix. He said it's like children can be down yards, but in a controlled fashion, where maybe a parent or a grandparent can tell them about the farm, show them what's going on. That's what he said. But like, he's saying, they've thrown the book at it. There is no more guidance. They've run out of things to tell farmers what to do in terms of health and safety. He said their inspectors are coming back and saying, still coming back with issues on farms, and that some farmers simply haven't listened to the advice, and that there's work to do. Look, he said, like, there's nothing else that can be done. Farmers just aren't listening, and it's something that's so key. If there's no farmer, there is no farm. Basically, there is still a farm, but things are going to take a massive change. Like, and Pat Griffin rightly said, people have to live with this nightmare for the rest of their lives. So why would you take a chance at it, I suppose, is the thing. Plan out your work, and farm safely.
No, I mean, you're dead right. I mean, having read your piece, I just said I put a call into the risk manager with FBD, Ciaran Roche, just to get an update on the stats and where we were in terms of farm fatalities this year. Listen to what he had to say.
Yeah, Jack, it's a real concern for us. I suppose last week when we spoke, there was 7 fatalities. That figure is up to 9 now. If it continues with that trend before the end of the year, we'll have 22 fatalities in Irish farms. We're seeing a lot of fatalities in relation to children again, which is very unusual. 3 so far this year. We've had 5 fatalities with farmers over the age of 65. And the same as every year, they're happening in the same manner. So we've had 3 livestock fatalities with the older farmer. All the fatalities with young persons related to tractors and machinery. And we just have to redouble our efforts to ensure that this doesn't continue, and we stop taking risks on the farm.
On the machinery side, Ciarán, can you give me a couple of examples in terms of what type of accidents, what's happening in terms of these machinery related accidents?
Yeah, so generally they're very simple. So this year most of them happen to be child related, but they're something as simple as not seeing someone coming behind you and reversing the tractor, someone coming into a blind spot and running over that person, a handbrake not working properly, the tractor rolling down the hill, or maybe the likes of a PTO shaft or some guarded part of a machine not guarded properly, someone who's in a hurry, not paying attention, maybe a loose piece of clothing, or just accidentally gets too close to the piece of working machinery and gets caught in it. So they're very simple things, and they're everyday type of incidents that could occur.
Right, some very revealing stats from Ciarán in terms of the vulnerable groups, the kids, and I suppose the older cohort that are working on farms, those over 65, that they are the ones that are getting caught up in these farm fatalities. Andy, if I was to come to you in terms of, like, I mean, your involvement with tillage farmers, like, I mean, the scale that has increased substantially, the type of machinery that has been used on these tillage farms has increased substantially. Now, it's not just tillage farmers, it is not just machinery. There's livestock issues as well that are causing causing these problems on farms. But I mean, two questions. One, why are farmers not listening to the safety message, do you think? And then just on a related piece, can you just give us an update in terms of where we are in the fields, what's happening in the various crops, and is the drop of rain that we got this week enough to kind of to keep problems away from the tillage sector?
Thanks, Jack. Safety, yeah, it's never possible to be diligent enough on safety. But I think one of the great challenges that must be faced up to, and I kind of think it's maybe not being faced up to, is the fact that we won't have farmers if we can't have farming children. And the challenge is how to mix and marry those two things. Like, I know from talking to farmers over the past few weeks when the season was very busy, they're all babysitting. They're doing an element of babysitting. So technically they're breaking the law. But that particular child is probably in the safest place they can be in the cabs of tractors. The challenge is not so much in and around the working machine in the field. The challenge is much more around the yards, because every child wants to be, particularly boys, they want to emulate the father. They want to be out with them and doing the things they're doing. So either we give them the model farm at home to be that farmer in their own little place, but the big danger is when they ramble out around the yard, despite the best efforts of the minders and the mothers or wherever. That's where they're at their greatest risk, because we do not have 360 vision out of these monstrous machines that now exist all over the place. And as big as a single tractor might be, when you add the trailer or any implement behind it, they become huge again. I do think, though, the element of your question that is really, really important is, how would you live with the consequence of having had the accident on your farm and your child? I think if we, or somebody else's child, I think if we stand back and think about that particular situation, we would be forced to think twice about everything we do and how we do it. And we don't react that well to everybody else telling us what to do. The most successful conclusions to safety must come from within, in the same way as so many of the big changes we do in life must come from within. When we want to do it, we will do it better than what somebody is telling us to do. Going back to what's happening in the fields, Jack, some people have had rain, others haven't had rain, but it's going to take quite a bit of rain to kind of ease the pressure. A small bit of rain that's going to drive disease and not be enough to sustain soil moistures might not be any major advantage. Indeed, it might prove to be more of a disadvantage. Well, no, I won't say rain is a disadvantage. I continue to say that it's a dangerous thing for Irish people to pray for rain, because when it starts, it might not know when to stop. And that's something that we're kind of all conscious of. But if we don't get rain fairly soon, we will have more crops in serious trouble. We do have crops, particularly on the lighter land and the drier land, even more so than in the northeast, where if crops established, generally they've held reasonably well. But we've inputs applied, we have nitrogen applied, and some of it might just still be sitting there. One of the things that I would be saying to people, and it doesn't matter what enterprise you're in, one of the consequences of getting a burst of rain now, which seeps into the ground on warm soil, will be you will get a big shot of mineralization of nitrogen. And if we get that, it could have negative consequences and positive consequences. But I think people should be conscious that if that comes in a place where you need nitrogen, well, then it's free nitrogen. Don't go throwing a whole pile of bag product that costs money in on top of it, because I think it is one of the inevitable consequences. Overall, things are not looking too bad across the tillage sector. We do certainly have patchiness in spring crops all over the place. Many people have got that drop of rain, but realistically, we're talking about 25 mil plus to make a serious difference. And I don't think a number of areas will get the colour of that unless you're lucky to get caught with a shower. So I don't think that we're going to get totally resolved out of this weekend. I hope I'm wrong, but we have to wait and see.
Yeah. Okay, no, you're right. And I mean, the same holds for the livestock sector. I mean, there's a number of livestock farmers, we'll say, that have cut silage early because the silage was simply wilting in front of them. And we covered that a good bit in the livestock show, which was released last night on Farm Tech Talk. So, look, good, excellent. Thanks, folks. Justin, maybe just a final question for you. I mean, it's. I suppose we just see this week that the UK has upped the ante in terms of trade talks with the EU. I mean, the suggestion is full WTO tariffs for product into the UK, which would kind of impact, of course, on our dairy sector where all the cheddar cheese goes and a lot of our beef goes. I mean, standing back, I suppose, from this week's developments in terms of that chat around the WTO tariffs. I mean, just remind us what is going on and I suppose why it's important.
Thanks, Jack. Yeah, look, and maybe just before we go to the Brexit side of things, to express our condolences on behalf of all the team in the Farmers Journal to all those families that are dealing with tragedies or even severe accidents on farms. It is very difficult. And look, I think one thing that we all need to be careful of is that nobody's in a position to throw stones in this. We've all had the near miss and the risk and got away with it. But I think that attitude of getting away with it is actually obviously clearly not right and something that we have to address. On Brexit, Jack, yeah, as you quite rightly say, of our cheddar, about 50% of our pig meat and poultry meat, and 250,000 beef, free flowing into the UK at present. Given where we're going in Brexit, that is going to incur a heavy tariff going forward. The minister has calculated that the impact of that could be about 1.7 billion in terms of financial hit on Irish export, on devaluing Irish product in the UK market. I think it was last autumn, Phelim O'Neill carried out an analysis showing that the potential impact of tariff on beef price, assuming that it doesn't increase the price for the consumer in the UK, which will be very difficult for a Conservative government who has always been welded to the notion of a cheap food policy. So if we assume that UK prices would stay the same and the tariff would be passed back down to the exporting country, it would be equivalent of a hit of over €1 a kilo on our beef price. And look, you don't need to be a mathematician as to where that would leave our beef price at present. So it's a real challenge. I suppose what the UK have done, Jack, is they have looked at the 2 weak points, Irish food exports into the UK and German car imports or exports from Germany, obviously, into the UK. And they're really anti in relation to the negotiations. And look, it is a negotiation tactic. But at the end of the day, Jack, we need to have detailed economic analysis that we can present to the European Commission. And they should be led by, and we've said it 2 weeks ago, both farm organisations and government, detailing what the financial impact is and actually holding Brussels to account when they have repeatedly said that Irish farmers carrying the burden of the UK leaving Brexit. I suppose it's now time for them to show what they actually mean by that, because these negotiations are going to go down to the wire.
Okay, hear you loud and clear, Justin, in terms of that piece and the importance of it. Look at folks, we've had a very busy show today. I suppose the intention of this piece of work is to try and get you in behind the story and hear the thoughts of our specialists. You know, we have our news specialists creating the stories and bringing them to you in the Farmers Journal. We have our field specialists then, I suppose, that are working with that. And, you know, the overall editorial team is to try and make it understandable to you as a farmer in terms of what's coming down the line. So look, thanks to my guests today, Justin McCarthy, Andy Doyle and Amy Forde, for taking time out to help us. Again, thanks to our guests, Conor O'Sullivan from Bord Bia, Danica Siemer from Ornua, and excuse me, and indeed Ciaran Roche from FVD Insurance. So look, don't forget our livestock show, our sister production, I suppose, that was released last night, Friday night, and you can watch that and full in-depth interviews with Conor O'Sullivan and Danica Siemer on farmersjournal.ie. So folks, it's been good, it's been enlightening. Thanks for the insights and thanks for the talk. Stay safe and safe farming until next week.